Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into a truly critical global choke point, a narrow strip of water that, despite its size, holds just immense power over the world's energy supply. This isn't just some point on a map, it's really a place where geopolitics directly intersects with, our global economy. And recently we've seen very real escalating threats from Iran to actually close this vital waterway, especially following events like Israel's Rising Lion operation back in June 2025. It's a situation that really has the world paying very close attention.
Right. And our mission in this deep dive is to truly understand why this strait is so important, beyond just the headlines. We need to dissect the complex claims of control, really delve into the turbulent history, the tensions that constantly seem to bubble up around it, and critically examine what the actual real-world consequences would be if it were, in fact, shut down. This isn't just about abstract political maneuvering. It's about the very flow of global resources that, frankly, powers everything around us.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the absolute basics. When we talk about the Strait of Hormuz, what exactly are we looking at geographically?
Yeah, simply put, it's a strait in the Northwest Indian Ocean. It's the vital connection between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, which then, ultimately leads out into the Arabian Sea. Think of it as the single narrow gateway for an entire region's maritime traffic out to the wider world.
Okay.
And to get a bit more precise, the strait effectively separates Iran from Oman. Now, while it's relatively wide in parts, it truly becomes a choke point at its most constricted point. It narrows down to just 33 to 39 kilometers wide. That's between Iran's Lambak Island and Oman's As-Salama archipelago.
33 kilometers. That's incredibly narrow.
It really is. And that's where you have the two shipping lanes, each 2 nautical miles wide with a buffer zone in between. Everything's tightly funneled right there. Its strategic significance is really defined by that narrowness.
Right. And within this crucial passage, there are these key islands that sort of factor into the control narrative.
Exactly. Its namesake, Hormuz, is there. You've also got Qashm, which is actually the largest island in the strait. Then there's Larak, Hangam, Greater Toom, and Abu Musa, all strategically important and all part of Iran. And then on the coastline itself, you find vital port cities like Iran's Bandar Abbas, and then across the way, the UAE's Fujairah, Jebel Ali, and Khor Fakkan. These aren't just dots on a map, they're major hubs for global trade and energy.
Okay.
Which brings us directly to why the Strait of Hormuz is, considered one of the most important maritime communication routes on Earth. Its significance just cannot be overstated. It is the primary transit route for oil tanker shipments coming out of the major Persian Gulf nations, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, all heading primarily towards Asian markets.
The physical geography is clear.
Okay.
But for anyone trying to grasp its true global impact, the critical question is, just how much of the world's energy actually passes through this single choke point? Can you, quantify that?
Oh, it's staggering, really. The strait transports somewhere between 15% and 20% of global oil, condensate, and petroleum products. In terms of barrels, that's roughly 17 to 21 million barrels every single day.
17 to 21 million barrels a day.
Yeah. And that's just oil and related products. It also carries over 30% of global liquefied natural gas, LNG, primarily coming from Qatar and the UAE. The sheer volume is just incredible. You're looking at anywhere from 200 to 300 vessels passing through daily.
Wow.
And during peak hours, that can be as frequent as, every 6 minutes.
Every 6 minutes. That's hard to even picture.
It is. And to put that into perspective, in 2024, a massive 84% of the crude and condensate and 82% of the LNG transported via the strait went specifically to Asian countries. China, India, Japan, South Korea, they were the largest buyers, accounting for something like 69% of those volumes. And for a country like Saudi Arabia, 38% of its crude and condensate exports relied on the strait in 2024. So this isn't just a regional conduit, it's truly the artery of the global energy market.
So what this all means then is that any significant disruption, any kind of closure, even partial, in the Strait of Hormuz would send systemic shockwaves far, far beyond the immediate region. We're talking about the stability of the entire global energy market and, all the industries that rely on it.
Exactly, which immediately raises the important question, who actually controls it, and why is that control so complicated?
Right.
Well, most countries around the world view the Strait of Hormuz as an international shipping zone. They believe its safety and passage should be governed by international maritime law, specifically the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, from 1982.
Okay, that sounds straightforward enough.
But yeah, there's a catch.
Yeah.
Neither Iran nor the United States has actually ratified that particular agreement.
So that fundamental difference in legal interpretation, that's a constant source of tension, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Iran essentially claims these are their territorial waters,
Giving them the theoretical right to control passage, at least in their view.
Precisely. Iran's position stems from expansions of its territorial waters over time. Its 1993 maritime law considers the strait, specifically anything within 12 nautical miles of its coast, as part of Iran's territorial waters. This legal stance, in their interpretation, allows only peaceful passage and gives Iran the theoretical right to close it in emergencies or if it perceives military threats. It also means they believe they require consent for foreign military vessels to pass. Oman, on the other side of the strait, holds a similar stance regarding its waters.
So if that's Iran's position, how do they reconcile that with the constant presence of, say, the U.S. Fifth Fleet patrolling right through there? That must be an even bigger flashpoint.
It is a huge source of friction. The consistent presence of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, which has been based in nearby Bahrain since the 1980s and regularly patrols the strait, is seen by Iran as a direct threat to its national security. So you have this fundamental divergence in how two major powers interpret the law of the sea, right, in this critical choke point. It means the Strait of Hormuz is inherently a flashpoint, and it provides cover for, deeper geopolitical power plays.
Yeah, a very tangible source of tension.
Yeah.
Let's turn now to the history of the strait, because it has, time and again, been a flashpoint. What patterns kind of emerge when you look back?
Well, you can trace this current dynamic back quite a way, certainly to the 1970s. After the British troops withdrew from the region, Iran began to assert greater control. A key moment was November 1971, when Iran annexed islands like Abu Musa, Greater Tum, and Lesser Tum. This was despite a prior agreement, a memorandum, with Sharjah concerning Abu Musa. Control over Abu Musa is particularly significant strategically because it provides vital protection for Iran's major naval base and port at Bandar Abbas. So this early move really set a precedent for Iran's assertive posture in the strait.
Okay, so that's the 70s. What about later conflicts?
Moving into the 1980s, during the long Iran-Iraq War, the strait became a major battleground in what's often called the Tanker War. Both Iran and Iraq actively attacked oil tankers and related infrastructure in and around the strait. It was dangerous. About 239 oil tankers were affected in some way. But, and this is crucial, the strait itself actually remained open throughout, though passage was certainly perilous.
So it was targeted but never fully shut down.
Correct. However, the period of 1987-1988 saw direct confrontations between U.S. and Iranian forces. This escalated after Iran started mining the strait, and one of those mines damaged a U.S. frigate. In response, the U.S. Navy conducted operations like Earnest Will, escorting tankers, and Praying Mantis, which was a direct attack on Iranian naval assets. These operations caused pretty significant damage to Iran's fleet and really highlighted the U.S. commitment to ensuring freedom of navigation, even if it meant direct military intervention.
So it seems like these incidents, from the tanker war right up to more recent events, show that while the strait has never been completely closed for long, it's constantly used as a pressure point, like a chessboard, as you said.
Exactly. It's a reminder that these global supply lines are inherently vulnerable, not just to outright conflict, but to this constant flexing of geopolitical muscle.
Listening to that history, it really does sound less like isolated incidents and more like a never-ending high-wire act.
Yeah.
How does a region, and really the world, operate under that kind of constant simmering tension? What has the last decade or so looked like?
Yeah, high-wire act is a good way to put it. The past decade, maybe decade and a half, has seen a pretty near constant drumbeat of, let's call them low-level provocations and sometimes direct confrontations. Tensions really renewed significantly in the 2000s, especially with the international sanctions imposed against Iran over its uranium enrichment program. That set the stage. Then you had incidents like in January 2008 when the U.S. accused Iran of provocation after 5 Iranian speedboats made dangerous approaches to 3 American warships.
Right, I remember that.
Then by 2012, Iran conducted large military exercises right in the Strait and even threatened to detain vessels in response to new U.S. and EU sanctions targeting their oil. The administration of the U.S. President Obama at the time declared closing the Strait a red line, but Iranian officials kept hinting they might do it if their oil exports were seriously hindered.
So the threats continued even with that red line warning.
Oh, yes. More recently, we've seen Iranian patrol boats detaining container ships, like one linked to an Israeli businessman in April 2024, and firing warning shots near tankers. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC Navy, seized 2 American boats and 10 sailors near Farsi Island back in January 2016. That was a major incident. And then in 2019, things really flared up. There were attacks on 4 vessels near Fujairah in May. Iran shut down a sophisticated U.S. RQ-4 Global Hawk drone in June.
It's a drone shoot-down.
Then in July 2019, the IRGC detained the British tanker Stena Impero, and shortly after, the USS Boxer, an American naval ship, shot down an Iranian drone. It was very tit-for-tat. The U.S. Central Command even launched Operation Sentinel specifically for maritime stability in the area.
So a lot of close calls and direct actions.
Definitely. And these incidents, they aren't really isolated events. They seem to consistently highlight Iran's strategy, maybe maintaining some plausible deniability while continuously asserting its influence, always sort of dancing on the razor's edge of escalation. It's also pushed European and Middle Eastern allies to send additional forces. France, for instance, started leading a European mission called EMASO, European Maritime Awareness, in the Strait of Hormuz from February 2020, just underscoring that international concern.
And as we mentioned right at the start, the threats persist. Following Israel's Rising Lion operation against Iran in June 2025, we heard top Iranian officials, including the head of the Parliament's National Security Committee and the IRGC Navy commander, explicitly state the possibility of closing the strait. An advisor to the supreme leader even specifically called for closing it to U.S., British, German, and French shipping. This isn't hypothetical anymore. It feels like a very real and immediate concern.
It does.
And if that were to actually happen, if this critical choke point were shut down, what are we looking at in terms of the economic consequences?
Well, the numbers bandied about are truly alarming. Some Iranian experts themselves have estimated that if the strait were closed, oil prices could surge dramatically, potentially hitting $250 per barrel.
$250 a barrel.
Yeah. Iraq's foreign ministry stated a closure could lead to a loss of roughly 5 million barrels of oil per day hitting the market, and they predicted prices could skyrocket to somewhere between $200 and $300 per barrel. And we've already seen how sensitive the market is. Remember, after an Israeli attack on Iran, Brent crude oil prices immediately jumped 13%, just like that, to $78.05 per barrel. That shows you the immediate reaction.
Right.
And specialists at major banks like JP Morgan had previously warned that in the event of a significant conflict in the region, prices could easily rise to $130 per barrel, or possibly even higher.
So this isn't just about, paying more at the gas pump, which has certainly happened. We're talking about a potential systemic shockwave, reverberating through every sector: manufacturing, supply chains, food costs, potentially triggering a global recession. The stakes just couldn't be higher.
They really couldn't. Which naturally begs the question, given these dire consequences, are there any viable alternatives? Can you bypass the Strait of Hormuz?
Yeah, is there a plan B?
The short answer, unfortunately, is that the options are quite limited. Most of the major oil-producing countries in the region, think Iraq, Qatar, Kuwait, they are almost entirely dependent on the Strait of Hormuz. It's their only direct route to get their energy to the crucial Asia-Pacific market.
So for them, there's really no alternative sea route.
Pretty much. Only a few countries possess pipelines that offer some capability to bypass the strait. Saudi Arabia is the main one. They have the big east-west petroline, also just called Petroline, which runs across the country to the Red Sea. Its capacity is significant, about 5.1 million barrels per day.
Okay, 5.1 million, that's substantial.
It is. They also have the Abqaiq-Yanbu gas pipeline, which can handle about 290,000 barrels per day of liquids. Then the UAE has the Abu Dhabi-Fujairah pipeline that goes to the Gulf of Oman, effectively bypassing the narrowest part of the strait with a capacity of 1.5 million barrels per day.
So Saudi Arabia and the UAE have some capacity?
Some, yes. But other potential pipeline routes, like the old Iraqi pipeline through Saudi Arabia, IPSA, or the Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline running through Turkey, are either non-functional due to past conflicts or politics, or currently closed. There was talk way back in 2008 of a massive $200 billion project to build a bypass channel in the UAE, but, well, That never got off the ground.
Right.
Even Iran itself completed its own bypass pipeline in 2021, the Gorjask pipeline. It goes to the Gulf of Oman outside the strait, but its capacity is only around 300,000 barrels per day initially. The vast majority of Iran's own oil exports still rely on their main terminal at Karg Island, which is inside the Persian Gulf north of the strait.
So putting it all together, while some alternatives exist, they're just nowhere near sufficient to compensate if the Strait of Hormuz were fully closed. It really underscores its irreplaceable role, doesn't it?
Absolutely irreplaceable. The existing bypass capacity just can't handle the sheer volume that goes through the strait daily.
Which makes Iran's strategic calculus, their repeated threats, all the more potent.
Exactly. And this brings us right to why Iran repeatedly uses the threat of closing the strait as a geopolitical tool. It's an incredibly powerful form of leverage, particularly when facing international sanctions imposed by the US and the EU, especially sanctions targeting Iran's vital oil exports.
It's their trump card, in a way.
It really is. And the IRGC naval forces, the ones primarily responsible for patrolling the strait on the Iranian side, are highly capable in asymmetric warfare. They possess large numbers of fast missile boats, sophisticated anti-ship missiles, and extensive naval mine capabilities. They could, realistically, effectively paralyze shipping, even if a complete long-term blockade is debated. They could certainly make passage extremely hazardous and costly.
But here's the interesting part, the paradox.
Yes, the paradox. The Strait of Hormuz is also the crucial export route for Iran's own oil, especially the significant amounts that go to China these days. So its continued operation is absolutely vital for the Iranian economy itself. While closing it is a potent threat, actually doing so would inflict immense economic pain on Iran, too.
So it's a weapon they might hesitate to fully deploy.
Precisely. There's also another layer. Western countries and Israel frequently accuse Iran of using the strait or the waters around it to illicitly supply weapons to allies in the region, like the Houthis in Yemen. This adds another dimension to its strategic importance for Iran beyond just oil exports.
So it's this inherent paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
Iran absolutely relies on the strait for its own economic survival, yet threatening its closure is simultaneously its most powerful diplomatic and military lever. The threat itself provides immense leverage against sanctions, maybe more leverage than actually closing it, which could be almost suicidal economically for Tehran.
That's a very good way to put it. The true strategic play might lie in understanding that delicate balance. The very act of not closing it, despite the capability and the repeated threats, could be seen as Iran's most powerful ongoing geopolitical maneuver. It's a kind of deterrence by denial, where the potential cost to everyone involved, including Iran, keeps the situation in this very precarious, tense equilibrium.
We've certainly taken a deep dive today into this critical waterway. I hope everyone listening now has a much deeper appreciation for this narrow passage and its truly immense global implications.
Indeed. And perhaps it leaves us with a final thought. Given this complex web of mutual reliance, the deep-seated historical tensions, and the potential for such devastating economic fallout, what really prevents a full-scale, long-term closure of the Strait of Hormuz from actually happening? What ultimately could be the breaking point?
Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear, new episodes every day.